Dr. Elena gasped as the ultrasound revealed not the expected bobcat kittens, but a grotesque collection of plastic waste filling the wild animal's abdomen. What they had mistaken for pregnancy was actually a death sentence of human garbage, slowly killing the magnificent predator from the inside out. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The harsh desert sun beat down on the Arizona landscape, transforming the rugged terrain into a shimmering mirage of heat and dust. Wildlife Rehabilitation Center Director Dr. Elena Vasquez wiped sweat from her brow as she scanned the horizon, squinting against the glare. At 42, Elena had dedicated her life to saving the desert's most vulnerable creatures, but today's rescue would test even her considerable experience. The call had come in at dawn. A bobcat found collapsed near Red Rock Canyon, barely responsive and in obvious distress. "Anything?" called out Mike Reyes, the center's head veterinary technician, as he finished setting up the portable medical equipment in the back of their rescue vehicle. "Not yet," Elena replied, checking her watch. "Ranger Collins said he'd meet us at the lookout point at 9. We've still got 10 minutes. As if summoned by her words, a dust cloud appeared in the distance, gradually resolving into the familiar shape of a Park Service truck. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Every rescue was different, but something about this call had set her nerves on edge from the start. The truck pulled alongside their vehicle, and Ranger Tom Collins emerged, his weathered face grim beneath his uniform hat. "Doc," he nodded in greeting. "Appreciate you coming out so quick." "Where's the bobcat?" Elena asked, already reaching for her medical kit. "About half a mile north in that shaded ravine," Collins pointed. "Found her this morning during my patrol. She's in rough shape, barely moved when I approached, which ain't natural for a wild bobcat." Mike joined them, carrying the transport crate. "Any visible injuries?" "Nothing obvious," Collins replied, "but I'm no vet. What I can tell you is she looks pregnant, very pregnant." Elena and Mike exchanged concerned glances. A pregnant bobcat in distress was a complicated case, potentially 2 or more lives at stake. "Let's move," Elena said decisively. "If she's as bad as you say, we don't have time to waste." The three made their way carefully down the rocky slope, the transport equipment awkward but necessary. As they approached the ravine, Collins raised his hand, signaling them to slow down. "There," he whispered, pointing toward a small outcropping of rock that provided the only shade for hundreds of yards. Elena's trained eyes quickly found the animal, a female bobcat, her distinctive spotted coat dulled with dust, lying on her side with labored breathing. Even from this distance, Elena could see the swollen abdomen that confirmed Collins's assessment. The bobcat was indeed pregnant and very close to term. "She hasn't moved since I found her," Collins said quietly. "I've seen plenty of bobcats bolt when humans get within 50 yards. Something's very wrong." Elena nodded, her mind already cycling through possibilities. Dehydration, poisoning, trauma, complications with the pregnancy. "Mike, prepare the tranquilizer. Low dose. She's already weak, and we need to consider the kittens." Mike nodded, preparing the dart with practiced efficiency while Elena studied the animal through binoculars. Severe dehydration, based on her posture and breathing pattern, possibly hyperthermia too. It's a miracle she survived out here. The darting went smoothly. The bobcat barely reacted to the pinprick of the tranquilizer, confirming Elena's fears about her condition. After ensuring the sedation had taken effect, they approached carefully, medical kits in hand. Up close, the situation looked even more dire. The bobcat's normally bright eyes were dull and unfocused, her magnificent coat matted and dirty. Her enlarged abdomen moved with each shallow breath. "Severe dehydration," Elena confirmed, checking the animal's gums. "And her temperature is dangerously high. Mike, start an IV fluid line. We need to stabilize her before transport." As Mike worked to find a vein, Elena gently palpated the bobcat's abdomen, her experienced hands feeling for the shapes of kittens within. What she felt made her pause, a frown creasing her forehead. "Something's not right," she murmured. "The shape is all wrong." Collins, who had been keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings, looked over with concern. "What do you mean?" "I'm not sure," Elena admitted, "but we need to get her back to the center immediately. Whatever's going on in there, these kittens are in trouble." The journey back to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center took 40 agonizing minutes, with Elena monitoring the bobcat's vital signs constantly. Twice she had to adjust the IV flow rate as the animal's condition fluctuated. By the time they pulled into the center's receiving area, the entire medical team was on standby, alerted by Mike's calls during the drive. "Trauma Room 1 is prepped," announced Sophia Chen, the center's youngest but most promising veterinarian, as she helped transfer the transport crate from the vehicle. "Ultrasound is standing by as requested." "Good," Elena nodded, hurrying alongside the gurney as they rushed the bobcat inside. "This is Luna," she said, giving the bobcat the first name that came to mind, a center tradition for their patients. Female, approximately 3 years old, advanced pregnancy, severe dehydration, and possible complications. The center's trauma room was a model of efficiency, despite being located in one of the most remote wildlife facilities in Arizona. What they lacked in proximity to major cities, they made up for in specialized equipment and expertise. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had become known throughout the Southwest as the premier facility for injured predators, particularly the native cat species that roamed the desert. As the team transferred Luna to the examination table, Elena noticed something clutched in the bobcat's front paw, a small blue object partially embedded in the pad. "What's that?" Sophia asked, noticing Elena's focus. Elena carefully extracted the object, a small plastic fragment, jagged on one side, with faded lettering still visible. "Looks like part of a water bottle, commercial brand." "Out there?" Collins frowned. "That's protected wilderness. No commercial development for 30 miles. "Illegal dumping, maybe," Mike suggested as he helped attach monitoring equipment to their patient. "Wouldn't be the first time." Elena pocketed the fragment for later analysis, her attention returning to the more pressing matter of Luna's condition. The monitors showed dangerously low blood pressure and an elevated heart rate. The bobcat's body was fighting a losing battle. "Let's get that ultrasound going," Elena directed, applying gel to the bobcat's distended abdomen. "We need to see what's happening with these kittens." Sophia positioned the ultrasound machine, its screen casting a blue glow over the concerned faces of the medical team. As the transducer made contact with Luna's abdomen, the room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the screen. The image that formed caused Elena to catch her breath. "That's not right," she whispered. Instead of the expected outlines of bobcat kittens, the ultrasound revealed something entirely different. A cluster of irregular shapes, densely packed within the uterine cavity. "Are those foreign objects?" Sophia asked, her voice barely audible. Elena adjusted the transducer, moving it slowly across the abdomen to capture different angles. The images only confirmed her growing suspicion and horror. "Those aren't kittens," she said grimly. "Luna's uterus is filled with plastic waste, bottle fragments, wrappers, microplastics. She's been eating garbage, probably from an illegal dump site." The revelation hit the team like a physical blow. Luna wasn't pregnant at all. She was dying from a massive accumulation of indigestible plastic waste that had perforated her intestines and collected in her abdominal cavity, creating the appearance of pregnancy. "My God," Collins breathed, the color draining from his face. "How is that even possible?" "Bobcats are carnivores," Elena explained, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "They shouldn't be consuming plastic at all. The only explanation is that her prey animals, rabbits, rodents, must have been contaminated. An entire food chain poisoned by human waste, Mike said, the grim reality settling over the room. Elena straightened her shoulders, years of crisis management taking over. Prep for emergency surgery. Now. Luna's dying from toxicity and internal lacerations. If we don't remove those materials immediately, we'll lose her. As the team rushed to prepare for surgery, Elena found herself staring at the ultrasound image still frozen on the screen. Dozens of pieces of human-made waste where new life should have been. In all her years of wildlife medicine, she had never seen anything so heartbreaking or so preventable. Dr. Vasquez called the anesthesiologist. "We're ready." Elena nodded, snapping on fresh gloves. Whatever had led to this tragedy, Luna was still fighting for life. And as long as the Bobcat wasn't giving up, neither would she. The operating room fell silent as Elena made the first incision, her hands steady despite the emotional weight of what they were about to find. Luna's vital signs remained precarious, the monitors beeping in an irregular rhythm that kept everyone on edge. The Bobcat's beautiful spotted coat had been shaved at the abdomen, the stark contrast between wild animal and clinical setting never more apparent than in this moment. "Suction ready," Mike said, positioning the equipment as Elena worked. "Beginning abdominal exploration," Elena announced, her voice calm despite the storm of emotions beneath the surface. 20 years of wildlife medicine had hardened her to many things, but this, an animal dying from consuming human garbage, still had the power to shake her to her core. As Elena carefully navigated through the layers of tissue, the extent of the damage became horrifyingly clear. Luna's abdominal cavity was a disaster zone of inflammation and trauma. What they had mistaken for pregnancy was actually severe bloating caused by an inflammatory response and accumulated waste material. "My God," Sophia whispered as Elena gently retracted the abdominal wall to reveal the Bobcat's internal organs. "It's worse than the ultrasound showed." Luna's intestines were inflamed and discolored, with several areas showing clear perforations where sharp plastic fragments had torn through the delicate tissue. The uterus itself was actually normal in size. The apparent pregnancy had been an illusion created by the distended intestines and accumulated plastic waste throughout the abdominal cavity. "First priority is to locate and repair the perforations," Elena directed, her focus absolute. "Sophia, follow behind me with the sutures. Mike, be ready to flush each section as we work." For the next 45 minutes, the team worked methodically, removing fragment after fragment of plastic waste. Each piece went into a specimen tray for later analysis. Bottle caps, microplastic particles, shards of larger containers, even a fully intact twist tie from a garbage bag. The collection grew alarmingly large as the surgery progressed. "This one has a label still attached," Sophia noted, carefully placing a larger fragment in the tray. "Looks like it's from a detergent bottle." Collins, who had remained to observe the procedure from behind the glass partition, shook his head in visible distress. The ranger had seen plenty of wildlife casualties in his 15 years of service, but nothing like this systematic poisoning of the food chain. "Blood pressure dropping," warned the monitoring technician, heart rate becoming erratic. Elena glanced up at the monitors, making a split-second assessment. "Push 0.5 cc's of epinephrine and increase the fluid rate. We're not losing her now." As Mike administered the medication, Elena continued her meticulous work, her mind racing alongside her hands. Luna's condition represented something far larger than one injured bobcat. This was evidence of an environmental crisis playing out in real time, with deadly consequences. "There's another perforation here near the pyloric junction," Elena said, identifying another tear where sharp plastic had sliced through intestinal tissue. "Sophia, 3 neo-absorbable suture." "How could she have ingested so much plastic?" Sophia asked as she worked alongside Elena, her younger hands quick and precise with the delicate suturing. Bobcats are strict carnivores. They don't scavenge garbage like coyotes might. Biomagnification, Elena replied grimly. Luna didn't eat this plastic directly. She consumed prey animals, probably rodents, rabbits, maybe ground squirrels, that had themselves ingested microplastics from contaminated vegetation or water sources. The plastic accumulated up the food chain until it reached a predator who couldn't process it. Mike looked up from the monitoring equipment. Like mercury in tuna. Exactly, Elena nodded. Except plastic doesn't dissolve or get excreted easily. It accumulates fragments and causes exactly what we're seeing here: perforations, blockages, inflammation. The smaller fragments have even penetrated the intestinal walls and migrated throughout her abdominal cavity. Vitals stabilizing, the monitoring tech announced, providing a momentary sense of relief to the intense procedure. Elena allowed herself a brief smile behind her surgical mask. She's a fighter. Let's keep going. As the surgery continued into its second hour, the team fell into a rhythm: locate, extract, repair, flush. The pile of plastic waste in the specimen tray grew steadily larger, a damning indictment of human impact on the wilderness. Elena's back ached from the prolonged, hunched position, but her focus never wavered. Luna deserved their absolute best efforts, not just for her own sake, but for what she represented. Last visible perforation repaired, Elena announced finally, straightening slightly to stretch her tense muscles. Now let's deal with this foreign material in the lower intestinal tract. The procedure to clear Luna's intestines of the remaining plastic fragments was delicate and time-consuming. Each section had to be carefully flushed and examined to ensure no sharp edges remained that could cause further damage as the Bobcat recovered. Another bottle cap, Mike said, catching a small blue disc in the suction trap. That makes 4, all different brands. I want everything cataloged and photographed, Elena instructed. This isn't just medical evidence, it's environmental evidence. When Luna recovers, her case is going to help us locate and clean up whatever illegal dump site is poisoning the wildlife in Red Rock Canyon. Sophia looked up, her eyes reflecting both determination and concern above her surgical mask. You really think she'll recover from this? Elena met her gaze steadily. I've seen bobcats survive injuries that would kill most creatures. They're remarkably resilient, and Luna here seems especially determined, but it's going to be a long road. BP and heart rate holding steady, reported the monitoring technician. She's responding well to the fluids and antibiotics. Good girl, Luna, Elena murmured to the unconscious bobcat. Just keep fighting. As the surgery entered its third hour, Collins was called away to respond to another ranger's request, but not before promising to return later for an update. The surgical team continued their meticulous work, the pile of extracted plastic growing ever larger. Final irrigation complete, Elena announced eventually, straightening her aching back. No additional foreign material visible. Let's begin closing. As Sophia prepared to assist with closing the incision, she paused, looking over the battlefield of Luna's open abdominal cavity, now clean of foreign material but bearing dozens of sutures where plastic had torn through delicate tissue. Even if she survives the surgery, Sophia said quietly, what are her chances long-term? The damage is extensive. Elena began the careful process of closing the innermost layer of tissue. Bobcats are territorial and solitary by nature. If she recovers, she'll need minimal space compared to pack animals. We can provide that in our recovery habitats. The real question is whether her digestive system can heal enough to function normally again. Mike, who had been organizing the collected plastic fragments, looked up. And what about the larger issue? If one bobcat accumulated this much plastic, what's happening to the rest of the ecosystem? Elena's expression turned grim behind her surgical mask. That's the question that's going to keep me up at night, Mike. Luna isn't just a patient, she's a warning. As they worked to close the final layers of Luna's incision, the overhead lights flickered briefly, a common occurrence at the remote facility, where power sometimes fluctuated during the intense summer heat. "Generators on standby if needed," Mike assured them, but the lights stabilized almost immediately. The timing of the flicker felt ominous to Elena, a reminder of how fragile their systems were, both the life support systems keeping Luna alive and the larger ecological systems being compromised by human carelessness. "Final sutures complete," Elena announced, tying off the last stitch with practiced precision. "Let's get her to recovery and monitor her closely. The next 24 hours will be critical." As the team prepared to transfer Luna to the recovery area, Elena found herself gently placing her hand on the Bobcat's head, a gesture both professional to check temperature and surprisingly personal, a connection with this wild creature who had become an unwitting messenger of environmental disaster. "What happened to you shouldn't have happened, Luna," she whispered, "and I promise it won't be for nothing." The recovery room hummed with the quiet beeping of monitoring equipment as Luna lay unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Elena stood by the window, staring out at the harsh desert landscape that stretched toward the distant mountains. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the recovery center's grounds, but Elena's thoughts were far from the beauty of the Arizona sunset. "She's stable for now," Mike said, joining her at the window. "Temperature's normalizing, and the IV antibiotics are running on schedule." Elena nodded, her reflection in the glass revealing the exhaustion that 3 hours of intense surgery had etched onto her face. "Have Sophia and Dr. Martinez alternate monitoring through the night. I want updates every 2 hours and immediate notification of any changes." "Already arranged," Mike assured her. "You should get some rest yourself." Elena turned from the window, her gaze falling on Luna's still form. The Bobcat looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable with her shaved abdomen and the network of monitoring wires attached to her body. It was easy to forget that just days ago this was a wild predator, perfectly adapted to one of the harshest environments on Earth. "I will," Elena said, though they both knew it was unlikely. "But first, I want to examine what we removed from her. If we can identify the source, maybe we can prevent this from happening to other animals." The research lab adjacent to the surgical suite had been transformed into an impromptu evidence room. On a large stainless steel table, the extracted plastic fragments had been laid out and organized by size and type. Under the bright laboratory lights, the collection looked even more disturbing. Colorful pieces of human consumption spread out like a macabre museum exhibit. Sophia was already there, photographing each fragment and entering preliminary data into the center's research database. She looked up as Elena entered. "I've sorted them by category," she explained, gesturing to the organized rows. Water bottles, detergent containers, food packaging, and a concerning amount of microplastics that had penetrated tissue walls. Elena pulled on a pair of latex gloves and picked up one of the larger fragments, a twisted piece of blue plastic with partial lettering still visible. "This looks like part of a bleach bottle. Industrial grade, not household." "That's what I thought too," Sophia nodded. "And these cable ties aren't the kind you'd find in home improvement stores. They're heavy-duty industrial quality." Elena's frown deepened as she examined more fragments. "This isn't random litter. This has the hallmarks of industrial dumping, possibly from a manufacturing facility or large-scale commercial operation. Which shouldn't be happening anywhere near Red Rock Canyon," Sophia pointed out. "That's protected wilderness." "Exactly." Elena carefully set down the fragment she'd been examining. "Mike," she called, knowing he'd followed her to the lab, "can you get Ranger Collins back on the phone? We need to coordinate an investigation." As Mike stepped out to make the call, Elena continued her examination, taking samples from various plastic pieces for chemical analysis. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that they were dealing with deliberate dumping, not casual littering or an accidental spill. "Dr. Vasquez," came a voice from the doorway. Elena looked up to see Dr. Ramon Martinez, the center's other senior veterinarian, his expression grave. "I've reviewed Luna's blood work. The toxicity levels are alarming. BPA, phthalates, and several other plastic-associated compounds at levels I've never seen in a wild animal." Elena wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still hit hard. "Chemical leaching from the plastics?" "Without question," Ramon confirmed. "Her liver is working overtime to process these toxins. It's a miracle she's still alive, honestly." The implications were staggering. If one bobcat had accumulated this much plastic and associated chemicals, what was happening to other wildlife in the area? The entire food web could be compromised. "We need to expand testing," Elena decided, the scientist in her taking over where the surgeon left off. "Blood samples from every animal brought in from that region for the next month, and we need to coordinate with fish and wildlife to test water sources and soil samples near where Luna was found." Mike returned, his expression confirming he'd reached Collins. "The ranger's on his way back. Says he's bringing his supervisor and someone from the Environmental Protection Division. They're taking this very seriously." "As they should," Elena replied, turning back to the table of plastic fragments. "This isn't just about Luna anymore. This is potentially an environmental crime scene." The next hour passed in a blur of activity as Elena coordinated with her team to prepare their findings for the arriving officials. The pieces of plastic were categorized, photographed, and documented with scientific precision. Luna's medical records were compiled, along with blood test results showing the alarming levels of plastic-derived chemicals in her system. By the time Ranger Collins arrived with his colleagues, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had transformed from a medical facility to the front line of an environmental investigation. "Dr. Vasquez," Collins introduced. "This is Catherine Walsh, Regional Director of Park Services, and Mark Hernandez from the Environmental Protection Division." Elena shook hands with both officials, noting the grim determination in their expressions. Good. They weren't taking this lightly. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, leading them to the lab. "What we're looking at appears to be systematic industrial dumping affecting the ecosystem of Red Rock Canyon." Hernandez, a serious man with salt and pepper hair and the weathered look of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk, surveyed the collection of plastic evidence with narrowed eyes. "Walk me through exactly what you found and where." For the next 30 minutes, Elena methodically presented their findings, the nature of the plastic fragments, their likely industrial origin, the way they had moved through the food chain to ultimately poison Luna. She showed them microscope images of microplastics embedded in tissue samples and the chemical analysis of toxins in the bobcat's bloodstream. "This isn't random garbage," she concluded. "The concentration and type of materials suggest deliberate dumping, possibly over an extended period." Walsh, the park director, had been taking notes throughout the presentation, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "If what you're suggesting is correct, we're looking at a major environmental crime. Red Rock Canyon is designated wilderness with the highest level of federal protection. And yet here we are," Elena said, gesturing to the evidence table, "with a critically injured bobcat and enough industrial plastic waste in her system to fill a small trash can." Hernandez had been quiet, examining the plastic fragments with careful attention. Now he looked up, his expression hardened with resolve. "We'll need to launch a full investigation immediately. Aerial surveys, ground teams, water testing, the works. My rangers are at your disposal," Walsh assured him, "and our facility will process any biological samples you need analyzed," Elena added. "We've already begun preparing protocols for expanded testing of wildlife in the area." Collins, who had been standing quietly near the door, spoke up. There's an access road on the north boundary of the canyon, officially closed to the public, but there have been reports of vehicle traffic at night. Might be worth setting up surveillance there. Hernandez nodded, pulling out his phone. I'm calling in our field team right now. We'll have investigators on site before dawn. As the officials began coordinating their response, Elena's pager beeped, an alert from the recovery room. Excuse me, she said, immediately heading for the door. I need to check on my patient. The short walk to recovery seemed longer than usual, Elena's mind racing with possibilities. Had Luna taken a turn for the worse? Were they about to lose the key witness in what was rapidly becoming a major environmental investigation? She pushed through the door to find Sophia monitoring Luna's vital signs, a cautious smile on her face. Her temperature's stabilized, Sophia reported, and she's showing signs of increased responsiveness. I think she's starting to wake up. Relief washed over Elena as she approached the recovery enclosure. Luna's eyes were still closed, but her breathing had deepened and one paw twitched slightly, the first voluntary movement since surgery. That's it, Luna, Elena murmured, checking the monitors herself to confirm Sophia's assessment. Keep fighting. Outside the recovery room window, darkness had fallen completely, the desert night claiming the landscape. Somewhere out there, an environmental crime was ongoing, poisoning the wilderness Luna called home. But here, in this quiet room filled with gentle beeping and the soft sound of a bobcat breathing, a small victory was unfolding. She's not out of the woods yet, Elena cautioned, adjusting Luna's fluid drip slightly. The next 12 hours will tell us if her body can begin processing the toxins effectively now that we've removed the source. Sophia nodded, understanding the gravity of their situation. What about the investigation? Do you think they'll find the source? Elena's expression hardened as she gently checked Luna's surgical site. They'd better, because Luna won't be the last victim if they don't. She's just the one lucky enough to be found in time. Dawn broke over the rehabilitation center with the characteristic suddenness of the desert, darkness giving way to brilliant light in what seemed like minutes rather than the gradual transition found in more temperate climates. Elena had spent most of the night moving between Luna's recovery enclosure and the impromptu command center that had formed in the center's conference room, where environmental protection officials were coordinating their investigation. She stood now at Luna's enclosure, dark circles under her eyes, testament to her sleepless night, watching as the bobcat showed the first real signs of consciousness. Luna's eyes had opened briefly an hour ago, unfocused but reactive, before closing again. Her vital signs continued to strengthen, defying the grim prognosis that Elena had privately harbored during surgery. She's quite remarkable, said Ramon, joining Elena with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to her. Most animals wouldn't have survived that level of toxicity, let alone major surgery to remove so many foreign objects. Elena accepted the coffee gratefully. Bobcats are survivors by nature. They've adapted to some of the harshest conditions on the continent. She took a sip, the bitter liquid reviving her slightly. But even they have their limits. What humans are doing to their habitat may be the one thing they can't adapt to. Luna stirred again, her ears twitching at the sound of their voices. Both veterinarians fell silent, watching as the bobcat's eyes opened again, more alert this time. The golden irises contracted in the morning light streaming through the window, focusing first on the immediate surroundings, then on the humans standing nearby. Easy, girl, Elena murmured, careful not to make any sudden movements. Wild predators coming out of anesthesia could be dangerous, confused and frightened by their unfamiliar surroundings, but Luna seemed more curious than frightened, her gaze steady as she assessed Elena. Remarkable, Ramon repeated. She should be panicking, but she's completely calm. She's still weak, Elena cautioned, "and the pain medication is keeping her subdued. When that wears off, we'll see her true temperament." As if on cue, Luna attempted to rise, only to sink back down with a small sound of pain. The movement disturbed her surgical site, and Elena quickly checked the monitors to ensure no damage had been done. "Vitals still stable," she confirmed, "but we should increase her pain medication slightly. I don't want her tearing those sutures." Ramon nodded, adjusting the medication drip. The latest blood work shows her liver enzymes are still elevated, but trending in the right direction. Her body is fighting the toxicity. Elena felt a surge of hope at this news. Luna's recovery was far from certain, but these were all positive signs. "Let's start her on small amounts of intravenous nutrition. Nothing by mouth yet. Her digestive system needs more time to heal, but we need to get some calories into her." As Ramon went to prepare the feeding solution, Elena's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mark Hernandez at the Environmental Protection Division. "First light aerial survey complete. You need to see this. Meeting in 20 minutes." Ensuring Luna was stable, Elena handed monitoring duties to a capable technician and headed to the conference room, stopping briefly to splash cold water on her face in an attempt to wash away some of the exhaustion. 24 hours ago, she had been preparing for what she thought would be a routine day at the center. Now she was at the heart of what appeared to be a major environmental investigation. The conference room had transformed overnight into an operations center. Maps of Red Rock Canyon and the surrounding area covered one wall, with aerial photographs and topographical surveys spread across the large table. Mark Hernandez stood at the head of the table, his expression even more serious than it had been the previous evening. "Dr. Vasquez," he acknowledged as Elena entered. "Thank you for joining us. How's the Bobcat?" "Showing signs of recovery," Elena replied, taking the seat offered to her. "Which is more than I expected, given the extent of her injuries and the toxicity levels." Catherine Walsh, the Park Service Regional Director, nodded. "That's good news. She may be our most important witness in this case." "Speaking of the case," Hernandez said, calling the room to attention, "the preliminary aerial survey has revealed something disturbing." He tapped a few keys on his laptop, and a series of images appeared on the large screen at the end of the room. These were taken at first light this morning. The images showed the rugged landscape of Red Rock Canyon from above, the familiar rust-colored formations standing out starkly against the surrounding desert. But what caught Elena's attention was a series of discolored patches along a dry riverbed at the northern edge of the canyon, areas where the natural reddish-brown soil had been stained a sickly grayish-white. "What are we looking at?" Elena asked, leaning forward to study the images more closely. "Chemical leaching," Hernandez replied grimly, "consistent with industrial waste dumping. Our preliminary assessment suggests these discolorations represent at least 3 separate dumping sites, possibly more." Collins, who had remained overnight to assist with the investigation, pointed to a thin line cutting through the landscape on the images. "That's the access road I mentioned. It's supposed to be used only for emergency services and park maintenance, but these images show recent tire tracks, heavy vehicles by the look of them." "How recent?" Elena asked, her scientific mind already calculating how long it would take for toxins to enter the food chain and accumulate in a predator like Luna. "Based on the vegetation disruption and erosion patterns, we're looking at repeated activity over the past 6 to 8 months, Hernandez answered, "which aligns with reports from local ranchers about declining wildlife populations in the area." Elena felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. 6 to 8 months of systematic dumping would explain the accumulation of plastics and toxins in Luna's system. It also meant the damage to the ecosystem could be far more extensive than they initially feared. "We need to expand wildlife testing immediately," she said. "Not just predators like Luna, but throughout the food chain, rodents, rabbits, birds, even insects." If chemical leaching has been occurring for months, the contamination could be widespread. Walsh nodded in agreement. I've already authorized emergency funding for expanded monitoring. We need to understand the full scope of the damage. What about the source? Elena pressed. Do we know who's responsible for the dumping? Hernandez exchanged a look with Walsh before answering. We have a lead. The access road connects to Highway 87 near an industrial park outside Red Rock City. There are 3 facilities there that use the types of chemicals and plastics we're seeing in the dumping sites and in your Bobcat. Let me guess, Elena said, her voice tight with controlled anger. Chemical analysis takes time, and until we can match the exact composition of the waste to a specific facility, we can't move forward with enforcement actions. Unfortunately, that's correct, Hernandez confirmed. We're expediting the analysis, but proper legal procedures must be followed if we want the responsible parties held accountable. Elena understood the legal necessities, but her mind kept returning to Luna, fighting for her life after being poisoned by human carelessness, or worse, deliberate criminal activity. Every day the investigation took was another day that wildlife continued to be exposed to these toxins. What can we do in the meantime, she asked, unwilling to simply wait while the bureaucratic process ground forward. My team is setting up containment measures at the identified dump sites, Hernandez explained. We're bringing in specialists to prevent further leaching into the soil and water table. And, he added, his voice taking on a harder edge, we've established 24-hour surveillance on the access road and the facilities in question. We're also issuing a public health advisory, Walsh added, warning people to avoid consuming game animals harvested from the affected areas and to report any signs of sick or distressed wildlife immediately. Elena nodded, appreciating the comprehensive approach while still feeling the urgency of the situation. The Wildlife Center can serve as a triage facility for any affected animals. We should also coordinate with the State University research labs. They may be able to help expedite the chemical analysis. As the meeting continued, Elena found her thoughts returning to Luna. The Bobcat had become more than just a patient. She was now the living embodiment of an environmental crime, her body literally bearing the evidence of human impact on the wilderness. If Luna survived, her recovery would symbolize hope for the healing of the larger ecosystem. If she didn't, Elena pushed that thought away. Luna would survive. She had to. 3 days after Luna's surgery, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had transformed into the epicenter of an expanding environmental investigation. The conference room remained commandeered by Hernandez and his team, with a steady stream of field agents, scientists, and government officials coming and going at all hours. The rehabilitation staff had adapted to their facility's dual purpose, continuing their regular care of injured wildlife while supporting the investigation however they could. Elena moved through the center's main hallway, nodding to a pair of EPA technicians as they headed out for another day of field sampling. Her focus, as always, remained primarily on her patients, especially Luna, whose recovery had become something of a miracle in the eyes of the staff. "Morning, Dr. Vasquez," called Sophia, emerging from the pharmacy with a tray of medications. "Have you seen Luna this morning? She actually ate a small amount of solid food." Elena's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Already? That's remarkable progress for intestinal surgery. Her digestive system shouldn't be ready for solids yet." "That's what I thought," Sophia agreed as they walked together toward the recovery wing. But when Mike was changing her IV, she showed interest in the meat paste we were preparing for another patient. He offered her a tiny amount and she took it. Kept it down, too. A cautious smile formed on Elena's face. "Wild animals continue to defy our medical expectations. Their will to survive is extraordinary." Her expression turned more serious. "But we need to be careful. Her digestive tract has dozens of sutures, and we don't want to stress those repair sites too quickly. When they reached Luna's recovery enclosure, Elena was struck by the change in the bobcat's demeanor. Gone was the lethargic, pain-dulled creature of days past. In her place was an alert, watchful predator. Luna's ears swiveled toward them as they entered, her golden eyes tracking their movements with unmistakable awareness. "Well, hello there," Elena said softly, approaching the enclosure with the practiced caution of someone who had spent decades working with wild predators. "You're certainly looking more like yourself today." Luna rose to a sitting position, her first fully upright posture since the surgery, and regarded Elena with what almost seemed like recognition. The movement was clearly still painful, a slight flinch betraying the bobcat's discomfort, but the fact that she could sit up at all was a significant milestone. "Remarkable," Elena murmured, reviewing the charts that hung outside the enclosure. Her latest blood work shows liver and kidney function continuing to improve. The antibiotics are keeping infection at bay, and her sutures are holding well. She looked up at Sophia. "I think our girl here might just make it." "Dr. Vasquez." A voice from the doorway interrupted their assessment. They turned to see Mark Hernandez, looking even more tired than Elena felt. "Sorry to interrupt, but we've got something you should see." Elena glanced back at Luna, who had settled back into her bedding but remained alert, watching them with unblinking focus. "Keep her on the current medication schedule," she instructed Sophia. "And note that tiny amount of solid food in her chart, but don't offer any more for at least 24 hours. Let's give her system time to adjust." Sophia nodded, and Elena followed Hernandez back to the command center. The conference room was busier than usual, with several new faces around the table. Hernandez made quick introductions. "Dr. Vasquez, this is Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI Environmental Crimes Unit, and District Attorney Carlos Mendez." The gravity of these additions to the investigation team wasn't lost on Elena. If federal law enforcement and the DA's office were now involved, the case had escalated significantly. "Doctor," Agent Torres acknowledged with a professional nod, "your work with the Bobcat has provided crucial evidence in our investigation. The DA's office has authorized search warrants based partially on the analysis of the plastics you recovered during surgery. We've identified the likely source," Hernandez explained, pulling up a series of photographs on the screen. "Desert Chem Industries, a chemical manufacturing facility on the edge of the industrial park. They specialize in industrial cleaners and solvents." The images showed a large, nondescript building surrounded by a chain-link fence. Nothing about its appearance suggested the environmental devastation allegedly originating from within its walls. "The company has been struggling financially for the past 2 years," Torres continued. "We believe they began cutting corners on waste disposal to reduce costs. Proper chemical waste disposal is expensive. Illegal dumping saved them millions. At the expense of an entire ecosystem," Elena said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "Precisely," agreed DA Mendez, speaking for the first time. "Which is why we're pursuing maximum penalties. The search warrants are being executed as we speak." Elena studied the photographs more carefully. "What about the other animal victims? Have you found any besides Luna?" Hernandez's expression darkened. "Unfortunately, yes. Since issuing the public advisory, we've received dozens of reports of sick or dead wildlife. Rangers have recovered the remains of 2 coyotes, several jackrabbits, and numerous smaller animals, all showing signs of chemical exposure. The university lab is analyzing tissue samples," Torres added. "Preliminary results confirm similar chemical signatures to what was found in your Bobcat." The news hit Elena hard. Luna's case wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of widespread contamination. We need to establish a dedicated intake protocol for affected wildlife, she said, already mentally reorganizing the center's resources. And we'll need additional funding for specialized treatment. These animals will require intensive detoxification protocols beyond our normal rehabilitation procedures. Already approved, Walsh said, entering the room with a tablet in hand. The governor has declared an environmental emergency for the Red Rock Canyon area. Additional funding has been allocated to your center, and 2 more veterinary specialists are being brought in from Phoenix to assist your team. Elena felt a complex mix of emotions: gratitude for the resources, determination to help as many animals as possible, and a deep anger toward those responsible. When will we know more about Desert Chem's involvement? Evidence collection at the facility should be complete by this evening, Torres replied. We've also placed 2 company executives under surveillance. If the evidence from the search confirms our suspicions, arrests could come as early as tomorrow. The meeting continued with discussions of containment strategies, public health concerns, and long-term environmental remediation plans. Throughout it all, Elena's thoughts kept returning to Luna and the other animal victims, the silent, innocent casualties of human greed. When the meeting finally concluded, Elena returned to Luna's enclosure, needing the simple honesty of animal care to center herself amid the complexity of the investigation. She found Mike checking Luna's vital signs, a pleased expression on his face. "She's doing even better," he reported. "Temperature normal, heart rate strong and regular. And look at this." He gestured toward the Bobcat, who was now standing fully upright in her enclosure, testing her balance with careful movements. First time she's stood on her own since surgery. Elena watched Luna with a mixture of professional assessment and genuine awe. The Bobcat's recovery defied medical expectations, especially given the extent of her injuries and the toxins still being processed by her system. "She's becoming quite the celebrity around here," Mike continued. "The whole staff keeps finding excuses to walk by and check on her." "With good reason," Elena replied. "She's not just a patient anymore. She's evidence, symbol, and survivor, all in one." She paused, watching as Luna delicately tested her weight on each paw. "And now she's giving us a lesson in resilience." Mike nodded, understanding Elena's deeper meaning. "Do you think we'll be able to release her eventually, back to the wild?" It was the question that had been hovering unspoken among the medical staff, whether Luna could ever return to her natural habitat. Elena considered carefully before answering. "That depends on several factors. Her physical recovery seems promising, but we need to ensure her digestive system can handle a natural diet. There's also the question of whether her territory will be safe for return." She frowned slightly. Even with containment measures, that area may remain contaminated for years. "So she might become a permanent resident?" Elena shook her head. "I hope not. Bobcats are meant to be wild. If we can't return her to Red Rock Canyon, we'll find another suitable habitat, one that's safe." She watched as Luna settled back down, seemingly tired from her brief exercise. She deserves a second chance at freedom after what humans have put her through. Mike's phone buzzed with a text message. He checked it quickly, then looked up at Elena with widened eyes. "It's from Sophia. They just brought in another victim. A young javelina showing similar symptoms to Luna when she arrived. Looks like we're going to be busy." Elena took one last look at Luna, drawing strength from the Bobcat's remarkable recovery. "Let's go. If Luna can fight her way back from the brink, we owe the same chance to every animal affected by this disaster." 1 week after Luna's surgery, the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center had evolved into a fully operational crisis facility. 2 additional recovery wards had been hastily converted from storage spaces to accommodate the growing number of affected animals. Staff worked in rotating shifts around the clock, many volunteering additional hours without compensation. The toll was visible on their faces, exhaustion mingled with determination as they fought to save as many lives as possible. Elena stood at the entrance to what staff had begun calling Toxicity Ward A, surveying the room with a clinical eye. 12 enclosures lined the walls, each containing an animal suffering from plastic ingestion or chemical exposure. The javelina that had arrived the day after Luna was responding well to treatment. A pair of kit foxes rescued from near one of the dump sites were still critical but stable. Various smaller creatures, jackrabbits, ground squirrels, a western screech owl, occupied the remaining spaces. "We're at capacity again," Sophia said, joining Elena with a tablet containing the latest patient records. "Fish and Wildlife just called. They've got 3 more cases coming in this afternoon." Elena nodded, unsurprised but concerned. "We'll need to convert the education room into another treatment area. Call the volunteers scheduled for tomorrow and see who can come in today instead." "Already on it," Sophia assured her. "The university is also sending over 3 veterinary students to help with basic care and monitoring." "Good." Elena moved further into the room, stopping at Luna's enclosure. The Bobcat had been moved from intensive care to the general recovery ward 3 days ago, her progress continuing to exceed expectations. She was now eating small amounts of soft food regularly and moving around her enclosure with increasing confidence. Luna acknowledged Elena's presence with a direct gaze that still retained its wild intensity, despite days of human interaction. Unlike some of the other patients, who had become docile through weakness or habituation, Luna maintained her essential wildness, a quality Elena respected and worked to preserve. "How's our star patient this morning?" she asked, addressing the question to the technician monitoring the ward. "Feisty," came the reply with a small smile. "Growled at me during the morning checkup, first vocalization since she arrived." Elena felt a surge of satisfaction at this news. A return to natural defensive behaviors was a positive sign, indicating Luna was feeling strong enough to assert herself again. "That's our girl," she murmured, making notes on Luna's chart. "Increase her protein intake by 10% today. Let's build up her strength for the next phase of recovery." A commotion at the center's main entrance drew Elena's attention. She could hear raised voices, unusual in the clinical setting of the rehabilitation facility. Excusing herself, she made her way to the reception area to find Ranger Collins engaged in a heated discussion with a man in an expensive suit who was jabbing his finger aggressively toward the ranger's chest. "Is there a problem here?" Elena asked, her calm voice cutting through the tension. Collins turned, relief evident on his face. "Dr. Vasquez, this is Mr. Lawrence Griffin. He's an attorney representing Desert Chem Industries." "Legal counsel," the man corrected sharply, extending a business card which Elena didn't take. "I'm here to discuss the allegations being made against my client based on evidence collected at this facility." Elena maintained her professional demeanor despite the immediate dislike she felt for the man's confrontational approach. "This is a wildlife rehabilitation center, Mr. Griffin. We treat injured animals. Any questions regarding the ongoing investigation should be directed to the Environmental Protection Division or the District Attorney's Office." Griffin's expression hardened. "The evidence you extracted from a wild animal is circumstantial at best and contaminated at worst. It would never stand up in court, and my clients are prepared to fight any charges based on such questionable scientific methods." Elena felt her careful control slipping. "Questionable? We have documented over 30 cases of wildlife poisoning directly linked to industrial waste-matching chemicals produced by Desert Chem. The plastic fragments we removed from Luna, the Bobcat, have been analyzed by 3 independent laboratories, all confirming the same origin." "Luna?" Griffin seized on the name with a smirk. "You've named the animal? hardly the action of an objective scientific witness. Before Elena could respond, Mark Hernandez appeared in the doorway, his face darkening when he spotted Griffin. "Lawrence, I thought I made it clear yesterday that all contact with witnesses should go through the DA's office. I'm simply exercising my client's right to examine the evidence against them," Griffin replied smoothly. "Especially evidence as unusual as surgical extracts from wildlife. Your client's rights are being fully respected," Hernandez said firmly, "which is more than they did for the rights of this community to clean water and uncontaminated public lands. Now, unless you have a court order, I suggest you leave before I have you removed for interfering with an ongoing federal investigation." The two men stared at each other for a long moment before Griffin adjusted his tie and turned toward the door. "This isn't over. My clients maintain their innocence and will be challenging every piece of evidence, especially anything coming from this facility." He cast a dismissive glance around the reception area before exiting. "Sorry about that," Hernandez said once Griffin had gone. "We should have anticipated they'd try something like this. The search warrants turned up damning evidence, internal memos discussing the cost savings of illegal dumping, falsified waste disposal records, even a schedule of night deliveries to the canyon." Elena's disgust must have shown on her face. They poisoned an entire ecosystem to save money, and now they're trying to intimidate us into backing down. "Standard corporate defense playbook," Hernandez sighed. "But it won't work. The DA is filing formal charges this afternoon. Criminal negligence, illegal dumping of hazardous waste, violations of the Clean Water Act, and animal cruelty, among others." Animal cruelty? Elena hadn't expected that charge. "Agent Torres's idea," Hernandez explained with a hint of satisfaction. "Each affected animal represents a separate count. Luna alone accounts for multiple felony charges." The mention of Luna brought Elena's focus back to her patients. "Speaking of whom, I should get back to the recovery ward. We're still fighting to save lives while the legal battles begin." Hernandez nodded understandingly. "I'll make sure security is increased around the facility. Griffin's visit suggests they're getting desperate." As Elena returned to her rounds, she found her thoughts troubled by the confrontation. The legal complexities threatened to overshadow the immediate crisis of caring for the affected wildlife. Politics, corporate interests, legal maneuvering. These were battles in a realm far removed from the direct, honest work of healing injured animals. She paused outside Luna's enclosure, watching as the Bobcat delicately groomed her front paw, the IV line still attached to her opposite leg, barely seeming to bother her. Despite everything she'd endured, Luna remained true to her nature, a wild creature adapting to survive. "You're the reason we're fighting this battle," Elena said softly to the Bobcat. "You and all the others who can't speak for themselves." Luna paused in her grooming to regard Elena with those penetrating golden eyes that seemed to contain ancient wisdom. For a moment, Elena felt a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between human and wild animal, a shared purpose that went beyond caregiver and patient. The moment was interrupted by Mike's arrival with lunch trays for the staff. "Thought you could use this," he said, handing Elena a sandwich and coffee. "You've been on your feet since dawn." Elena accepted gratefully, suddenly aware of her hunger. "Thanks. Any word on the new arrivals from Fish and Wildlife?" "ETA 30 minutes, Mike confirmed. Dr. Martinez is prepping the intake area now." As they stood there, a sudden commotion from Luna's enclosure drew their attention. The Bobcat had risen to her feet and was pacing restlessly, her movements more fluid and coordinated than they had been since her arrival. "Look at that," Mike said with admiration. "She's moving almost normally." Elena observed Luna's gait with a professional eye, noting the improving strength and balance. "Her physical recovery is remarkable. The real question is how much of the chemical damage will be permanent. You think she could still have long-term effects? Mike asked. The toxicology reports suggest some of these compounds can cause lasting damage to liver and kidney function, Elena explained. Luna's labs are trending positive, but we won't know for sure until she's fully recovered from surgery and we can run more comprehensive tests. Luna completed another circuit of her enclosure before settling again, her eyes still alert and watching them through the transparent barrier. One day at a time, Elena said, as much to herself as to Mike. Right now, every day she improves is a victory. The center's front door chime sounded, announcing new arrivals. Elena handed her half-eaten sandwich back to Mike. That'll be the new patients. Hold that thought. And my lunch. As she hurried toward the intake area, Elena felt the familiar mix of dread and determination that had become her constant companion over the past week. More victims meant more suffering, more evidence of the damage being done, but it also meant more chances to make a difference, to fight back against the destruction with the tools she knew best: medicine, science, and an unwavering commitment to the wild creatures under her care. 2 weeks after Luna's surgery, the media had discovered the story. What began as local coverage quickly expanded to national interest as the details emerged. A wild bobcat poisoned by corporate negligence fighting for survival while becoming the centerpiece of a major environmental crimes case. The symbolism was too powerful to ignore, and journalists descended on the small desert community in droves. Elena had reluctantly agreed to a single press conference, coordinated with the Environmental Protection Division and the District Attorney's Office. She stood now at a makeshift podium outside the rehabilitation center, cameras and microphones pointed at her from every angle. Despite her discomfort with the attention, she understood the importance of public awareness in cases like this. Luna's condition continues to improve daily, she explained in response to a reporter's question. She's now eating a modified natural diet and moving with increasing strength and coordination. However, I want to emphasize that her recovery is still ongoing, and the long-term effects of her chemical exposure remain uncertain. Is it true that what was initially thought to be a pregnancy was actually plastic waste? Called out another journalist. Elena nodded gravely. Yes, the abdominal distension that mimicked pregnancy was caused by inflammation and the accumulation of plastic fragments throughout her digestive tract and abdominal cavity. We removed over 2 pounds of plastic waste during surgery. A murmur ran through the assembled press corps at this detail. The visual was powerful. A wild predator so contaminated with human garbage that it appeared pregnant. Dr. Vasquez asked a reporter from a major environmental publication, "How widespread is the damage to the ecosystem at Red Rock Canyon?" Elena glanced at Hernandez, who nodded his permission for her to address the question. The investigation is still ongoing, but preliminary findings indicate contamination extending approximately 12 square miles from the dump sites. Every level of the food chain shows evidence of impact, from soil microorganisms to apex predators like Luna. And the timeline for recovery? Pressed the same reporter. Environmental remediation experts estimate a minimum of 5 years for the most severely affected areas, possibly decades for full restoration. Elena's voice remained clinical, but those who knew her could detect the controlled anger beneath her professional demeanor. Some damage may be permanent. After fielding several more questions, Elena gratefully yielded the podium to D.A. Mendez, who outlined the criminal charges filed against Desert Chem Industries and 3 of its executives. The list was substantial: multiple environmental crimes, animal cruelty charges, and fraud related to falsified disposal records. The state is pursuing maximum penalties, Mendez concluded. We intend to make it clear that Arizona takes environmental crimes seriously. This case represents not just justice for the affected wildlife and ecosystem, but a warning to any corporation that might consider similar cost-cutting measures at the expense of our natural heritage. When the press conference finally ended, Elena retreated gratefully to the familiar environment of the treatment rooms. The media circus, necessary as it might be for raising awareness, felt like a distraction from the real work, healing the victims and protecting the surviving wildlife. She found Sofia and Ramon in Luna's recovery area, engaged in what appeared to be a friendly disagreement over treatment protocols. "Her liver values are still elevated," Ramon was saying, pointing to Luna's latest lab results. "I think we should continue the detoxification protocol for at least another week." "But look at her physical improvements," Sofia countered. "She's restless in this enclosure. Wild predators can suffer psychological stress from prolonged confinement, which could impede her recovery." Elena observed Luna as her colleagues debated. The bobcat was indeed showing signs of restlessness, pacing the perimeter of her enclosure with increasing frequency, her movements fluid and purposeful. The surgical incision had healed remarkably well, now just a thin line visible beneath the regrowth of fur. "You're both right," Elena said, joining the conversation. "Her body is still processing toxins, but her physical recovery has outpaced our expectations." She considered the options carefully. "Let's compromise, move her to the outdoor recovery habitat, where she'll have more space and natural stimuli, but continue the medication protocol for another week." The outdoor recovery habitats were one of the center's most valuable resources, spacious enclosures designed to mimic natural environments while still allowing for monitoring and medical intervention when necessary. For an animal like Luna, transitioning from the clinical setting of the treatment room to a more natural environment could provide significant psychological benefits. "I'll make the arrangements," Sofia said, clearly pleased with the decision. "The small canyon habitat should be perfect. It even has a natural rock shelf similar to what she might use as a resting spot in the wild." As Sofia left to prepare the habitat, Ramon showed Elena the latest test results from the broader ecological sampling. "We're seeing a consistent pattern of bioaccumulation," he explained. "The plastic-derived chemicals are concentrated in higher levels as they move up the food chain." Elena studied the data with a frown, which explains why predators like Luna are showing the most severe symptoms. "Exactly. The rabbits and rodents consume contaminated vegetation, concentrating the toxins in their tissues. Then predators consume multiple prey animals, further concentrating the chemicals." Ramon sighed heavily. "Classic biomagnification, but with plastic-derived compounds instead of the usual heavy metals or pesticides we typically see." The implications were sobering. Even as they successfully treated individual animals, the underlying contamination continued to work its way through the ecosystem. For every animal brought to the center, countless others were suffering and dying unseen in the wilderness. "How's the remediation effort progressing?" Elena asked. "Containment of the primary dump sites is complete," Ramon reported. "They've installed filtration systems to prevent further leaching into the groundwater, and removal of the most contaminated soil has begun. But it's a massive undertaking." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion from Luna's enclosure. The bobcat had stood up on her hind legs, paws pressed against the transparent barrier, intensely focused on something outside. Following her gaze, Elena was surprised to see a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, standing just beyond the staff-only barrier, staring in wonder at Luna. "Hey there," Elena called, approaching the boy. "This area is restricted. Where are your parents?" The boy jumped slightly, clearly not expecting to be caught. "Sorry," he said quickly. "My mom's talking to someone in the front office. I just wanted to see Luna." His expression was a mix of apology and excitement. "Is that her? The bobcat from the news?" Elena couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "Yes, that's Luna, but she's still recovering, which is why visitors aren't allowed in this area." The boy nodded solemnly. I understand. I made something for her, though. He held out a carefully folded piece of paper. It's a card, to help her feel better. Elena accepted the homemade card, touched by the gesture. The front featured a colorful, if anatomically creative drawing of a bobcat surrounded by trees and mountains. Inside, in careful childish handwriting, was a simple message. Get well soon, Luna. The desert needs you. From Jacob. That's very thoughtful, Jacob, Elena said. I'm sure Luna appreciates it. She glanced at the bobcat, who had lost interest in them, and returned to pacing her enclosure. Will she get to go home? Jacob asked, his young face serious with concern. The question, so simple yet so complex, caught Elena off guard. We hope so, she answered honestly. We're doing everything we can to make sure she's healthy enough to return to the wild, and other people are working to clean up her home so it's safe for her. Jacob considered this information with the solemn thoughtfulness unique to children. My teacher says we have to take care of nature because animals can't clean up our messes. Your teacher is very wise, Elena said, thinking how succinctly the child had captured the essence of the entire situation. That's exactly right. Jacob's mother appeared then, apologizing for her son's wandering. As they left, Elena found herself looking at the child's card again, struck by the simple truth it represented. Luna and the other animals at the center weren't just patients. They were reminders of a fundamental responsibility that too many humans had forgotten or chosen to ignore. The transition to the outdoor recovery habitat marked a turning point in Luna's rehabilitation. The enclosure, designed to mimic her natural environment while still allowing for medical monitoring, provided the bobcat with space to climb, explore, and begin rebuilding the muscles weakened by surgery and confinement. Elena watched through the observation blind as Luna investigated her new surroundings, her movements growing more fluid and confident with each passing day. She's using the vertical space now, Sophia noted one morning, 3 weeks after Luna's surgery. They observed as the bobcat climbed effortlessly to a rock ledge 6 feet above the ground, surveying her domain with the characteristic vigilance of her species. Her strength is returning, Elena agreed, and her latest blood work shows continued improvement in liver and kidney function. The detoxification protocol is working. Luna had become the rehabilitation center's most famous resident, her recovery followed by thousands through social media updates and news reports. The center had established a dedicated webpage tracking her progress, complete with a live camera feed that had become unexpectedly popular. Wildlife advocates, environmental activists, and animal lovers around the country had embraced Luna as a symbol of both environmental devastation and the resilience of nature. The publicity has been good for the center, Mike commented, joining them at the observation blind. Donations are up 300% since Luna's story broke. We've received enough to fund the new critical care wing we've been planning for years. And for the other affected animals? Elena asked, her priorities unchanged despite the media attention. 27 successfully treated and released so far, Mike reported proudly. 14 still in treatment, all showing improvement. 3, unfortunately, were too far gone when they arrived. His expression sobered at the last statistic. Elena nodded, accepting the reality of their work. Not every animal could be saved, especially those suffering from severe toxic exposure. The fact that they had successfully rehabilitated so many was a testament to the staff's dedication and expertise. The real victory will be making sure this doesn't happen again, she said, watching as Luna settled onto her rock ledge, perfectly mimicking the resting behavior she would display in the wild. The legal case against Desert Chem Industries had moved forward with surprising speed, driven by overwhelming evidence and public outrage. The corporation's initial defiance had crumbled when faced with internal documents revealed during the investigation, memos explicitly discussing illegal dumping as a cost-saving measure, with full awareness of the environmental risks. 2 executives had already accepted plea deals, agreeing to testify against the company's CEO, Richard Grayson, who continued to maintain his innocence despite mounting evidence of his direct involvement. The corporation itself faced fines potentially reaching into the tens of millions, with additional requirements for funding the complete remediation of the affected areas. "Dr. Vasquez?" A voice from the doorway drew Elena's attention. It was Catherine Walsh from the Park Service, accompanied by Mark Hernandez. Both looked unusually serious, even considering the circumstances. "What's happened?" Elena asked, immediately alert to their expressions. "We need to talk," Hernandez replied grimly. "Privately." They moved to Elena's small office, where Walsh carefully closed the door before speaking. "We've received a threat," she said without preamble. "Against the rehabilitation center and specifically against Luna." Elena felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "What kind of threat?" "An anonymous tip came into the EPA hotline this morning," Hernandez explained. "The caller claimed that if the Bobcat testifies, it won't live to see the courtroom." "Testifies?" Elena repeated incredulously. "Luna is an animal, not a witness who can take the stand." "They're not being literal," Walsh clarified. "Luna's medical records, the plastic fragments removed during surgery, the toxicology reports, all of this is evidence in the case against Desert Chem. In legal terms, this evidence testifies to the company's actions." "And someone wants to prevent that by harming Luna?" Elena struggled to comprehend the twisted logic. "She's already had the surgery. The evidence has been collected and documented. Hurting her now wouldn't change anything." "It's not about logic," Hernandez said wearily. "It's about intimidation and retaliation. Luna has become the face of this case. Harming her would be a message, not a strategic move to suppress evidence." Elena's protective instincts flared immediately. "What security measures are being implemented?" "We've already increased patrols around the perimeter," Walsh assured her. "The FBI is taking the threat seriously and has assigned agents to monitor the situation. We're also installing additional surveillance cameras today." "All staff need to be alerted," Elena insisted. "And we should limit access to Luna's habitat to essential personnel only." Hernandez nodded in agreement. "Already in progress. We've also expedited the final stages of the criminal case. The DA believes we're close to a resolution, possibly within days rather than weeks." The news of the threat spread quickly among the center's staff, generating a mix of outrage and determination. Nobody voiced the option of backing down or reducing their commitment to the case. Instead, the team rallied, establishing informal security protocols beyond the official measures, staff members taking breaks near Luna's habitat, volunteers extending their shifts to maintain a constant presence throughout the facility. Elena found herself spending even more time than usual at the center, often sleeping on the cot in her office, rather than returning to her home 10 miles away. Her concern wasn't just for Luna, but for all the animals under their care and the staff who had become targets simply for doing their jobs. 3 tense days passed without incident. Luna continued to improve, oblivious to the human drama surrounding her. Her outdoor habitat had been modified with additional security features. Cameras monitored every angle, and the perimeter had been reinforced with secondary fencing to prevent unauthorized access. On the 4th day, Elena was reviewing treatment plans in her office when an unfamiliar sound caught her attention. A sharp, mechanical click, followed by a soft hiss. Years of wilderness experience had trained her to recognize sounds that didn't belong, and this one triggered immediate alarm. She rose quickly, moving toward her office door just as the acrid smell reached her nostrils. "Gas! Evacuation!" she shouted, pulling the center's emergency alarm as she rushed into the hallway. "Everyone out now, gas leak!" The response was immediate and orderly. The staff had drilled for emergencies regularly, and they moved quickly to secure patients and exit the building. Elena ran toward the treatment rooms, ensuring all animals were accounted for as staff transferred the most critical cases to transport crates. "Fire department and hazmat are on their way," Mike reported, coordinating the evacuation with practiced efficiency. "All human personnel accounted for. We're moving the critical patients to the auxiliary facility as planned." Elena nodded, mentally checking off the emergency protocols they were following. "What about Luna?" "Sophia's heading to her habitat now," Mike replied. "The outdoor enclosures should be safe from the gas, but we're implementing full evacuation anyway, just to be certain." Elena made her way quickly to Luna's habitat, the smell of gas growing fainter as she moved away from the main building. She found Sophia already there, preparing a transport crate. "Everything okay here?" Elena asked, scanning the enclosure for Luna. Sophia nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Luna's secure, but I found something concerning." She pointed to a small device attached to the habitat's water supply, a canister with a digital timer, wires connecting it to the water filtration system. "Don't touch it," Elena warned, immediately recognizing the implications. This wasn't an accident. Someone's trying to poison her. The realization hit like a physical blow. The gas leak in the main building wasn't the real attack. It was a diversion, meant to draw attention away from the targeted attempt on Luna's life. Had Sophia not checked the habitat as part of the evacuation protocol, the device would have released whatever it contained into Luna's water supply, potentially killing her before anyone realized what had happened. "Call Hernandez," Elena instructed grimly. "Tell him we need the FBI here immediately, and get the bomb squad too. We don't know what else might be rigged." As Sophia made the call, Elena turned her attention to Luna, who was watching them with alert wariness from her rock ledge, sensing the unusual activity. "It's okay, girl," she said softly. "We've got you." The attack represented a shocking escalation, from anonymous threats to actual attempted murder of an animal patient, and potentially the human staff as well. Someone was desperate enough to stop Luna's testimony that they were willing to commit serious crimes to do so, which meant the case against Desert Chem was even stronger than Elena had realized. It also meant that Luna was no longer safe at the rehabilitation center, no matter how many security measures they implemented. They needed a new plan, immediately. The aftermath of the attack transformed the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center into something resembling a crime scene. FBI agents and windbreakers collected evidence, while bomb squad technicians carefully removed the device from Luna's water system. Preliminary analysis confirmed Elena's worst fears. The canister contained a concentrated solution of antifreeze, which would have been lethal to Luna and any other animal that drank from the contaminated water. "It was professional work," Agent Torres told Elena as they stood outside the center's perimeter, watching the investigation unfold. "Timer, remote trigger, careful installation to avoid detection. This wasn't some angry local or environmental extremist. This was planned by someone with resources and expertise." Elena's expression hardened. "Desert Chem." "We can't prove that yet," Torres cautioned. "But yes, that's our working theory. The timing is suspicious. Grayson's trial is set to begin next week, and Luna's medical evidence is central to the prosecution's case." "What now?" Elena asked, her concern primarily for Luna and the other animals under her care. "We can't guarantee their safety here, not after someone's already breached our security once." Torres nodded in agreement. "We're implementing a protection plan. The FBI has a secure facility about 40 miles from here, originally designed for endangered witness housing. We'd like to temporarily relocate Luna there until the trial concludes." The idea of moving Luna yet again troubled Elena. The Bobcat had already endured so much stress: capture, surgery, recovery in an unfamiliar environment. Each transition increased the risk of psychological impacts that could affect her eventual return to the wild. But the alternative, leaving her vulnerable to another attack, was unacceptable. "I'll need to accompany her," Elena said firmly, "and we'll need to recreate her recovery habitat as closely as possible to minimize stress." "Already factored into the plan," Torres assured her. "We anticipated you wouldn't let her out of your sight. The facility has a secure outdoor area that can be adapted for her needs, and we'll have a fully equipped medical station on site." The relocation took place under cover of darkness later that night, with a decoy transport arranged to divert any watching eyes. Luna, sedated for the journey, traveled in a specially equipped vehicle with Elena, monitoring her vital signs throughout the trip. A small team of trusted staff accompanied them, Sophia, Ramon, and Mike, to ensure 24-hour care could be maintained at the new location. The FBI's secure facility turned out to be a converted ranch house set on 10 acres of fenced property in the foothills beyond Tucson. The main house had been transformed into a combination of living quarters and office space, while several outbuildings provided secure areas that could be adapted for various purposes. Luna's new temporary home was established in what had once been a horse stable, now modified with the climbing structures and natural features she had grown accustomed to at the rehabilitation center. "It's not ideal," Elena admitted as they settled Luna into the space, "but it's secure, and it's only temporary." The Bobcat regained consciousness slowly, her golden eyes taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with obvious wariness. She retreated to the highest point in the enclosure, a shelf designed to mimic her favorite rock ledge, and observed them cautiously from this vantage point. "She's stressed, but handling it better than I expected," Sophia observed. "Her vitals are stable, and she's alert and responsive." "Keep her on the regular medication schedule," Elena instructed, "and let's minimize human interaction as much as possible. The less disruption to her routine, the better." As the team established their operational protocols at the secure facility, developments in the case against Desert Chem Industries accelerated rapidly. The attempted attack on Luna had backfired spectacularly, drawing national media attention and intensifying public outrage against the corporation. The FBI quickly traced the device to a private security contractor with direct ties to Richard Grayson, Desert Chem's CEO. 3 days after Luna's relocation, Hernandez arrived at the secure facility with news. "They've arrested Grayson," he announced as Elena met him at the main house, along with the security contractor who planted the device. Both are facing multiple federal charges, including attempted destruction of evidence and conspiracy. "That's good news," Elena said cautiously. "But what about the environmental crimes? The original case?" "That's the best part," Hernandez replied, his exhausted face showing genuine satisfaction for the first time in weeks. "Grayson's CFO has turned state's evidence, offering complete testimony about the company's illegal dumping program in exchange for immunity. He's provided documentation going back 3 years, detailed records of exactly what was dumped when and under whose authorization. The implications were significant. With insider testimony and documentation, the prosecution's case was essentially guaranteed to succeed. Desert Chem would face the maximum penalties available under environmental law, and Grayson himself was looking at potential prison time, a rarity in corporate environmental crime cases. "What does this mean for Luna?" Elena asked, her priority unchanged despite the legal victories. "It means she's safer, but we'll maintain security until Grayson's trial concludes," Hernandez explained. "More importantly, it means the remediation funding is secured. The judge has ordered Desert Chem's assets frozen specifically to ensure that cleanup efforts will be fully financed regardless of the company's ultimate fate." This was the news Elena had been hoping for. Certainty that the environmental damage would be addressed, not just promises that might evaporate in protracted legal battles. For Luna and the other wildlife affected by the contamination, habitat restoration was the only true justice that mattered. "How long will the remediation take?" she asked. "Initial containment is already complete," Hernandez replied. "The comprehensive cleanup will take years, but the most severely affected areas should be restored to safety standards within 12 to 18 months. Elena processed this information, mentally calculating what it meant for Luna's eventual release. The Bobcat had become the face of the entire environmental crisis, but she was still, fundamentally, a wild animal deserving of her freedom. If her recovery continued at the current pace, she would be physically ready for release within a month or two, but her territory might not be safe for her return until long after that. "We may need to consider alternative release sites," she said, thinking aloud. "Areas with similar habitat characteristics but without contamination." Hernandez nodded in understanding. Fish and Wildlife has already identified several potential locations. They're conducting surveys now to determine the most suitable option. Over the next 2 weeks, Luna continued to thrive despite the disruption of the relocation. Her physical recovery appeared complete. She moved with the natural grace and strength of a healthy bobcat, showing no lingering effects from her surgery. Blood tests confirmed that her body had processed most of the toxins, with liver and kidney function returning to normal ranges. Most importantly, her wild nature remained intact. Unlike some rehabilitation cases, where animals became habituated to human presence, Luna maintained a healthy wariness of her caretakers. She tolerated their necessary interventions, but showed no signs of seeking human interaction or approval, exactly the response Elena had hoped to see. "She's ready," Elena told her team as they conducted Luna's weekly assessment. "Medically, behaviorally, she's ready to return to the wild." The statement hung in the air, carrying both triumph and a hint of sadness. Luna's recovery represented an extraordinary success, yet her case had become something larger than one animal's journey. She was a symbol, a catalyst for change, the living embodiment of both environmental destruction and the possibility of healing. The northeast section of Coronado National Forest has been identified as the optimal release site, Ramon reported, reviewing the latest findings from Fish and Wildlife. Similar prey base, appropriate territory size, no resident female bobcats in the immediate area, and critically, no detected contamination. Elena studied the map he provided, noting that the proposed release site was over 100 miles from Luna's original territory, a significant relocation, but necessary given the circumstances. The question now was timing, when to take this final step in Luna's journey. The decision was complicated by factors beyond Luna's readiness. The trial of Richard Grayson was scheduled to begin in 1 week, with Luna's medical evidence and recovery story featured prominently in the prosecution's case. While her physical presence wasn't required in the courtroom, the media attention surrounding the trial would inevitably focus on her status and location. "We have 2 options," Elena said finally. "Release her quietly before the trial begins, or wait until after the verdict to avoid media circus at the release site." The team exchanged thoughtful glances, each weighing the competing priorities: Luna's freedom against the strategic timing that might best serve the larger cause of environmental justice she had come to represent. In the end, Elena made the decision that put Luna's needs first. "We release her before the trial," she announced to the team. "Luna isn't a symbol or a piece of evidence. She's a wild animal who deserves her freedom as soon as she's ready." The decision wasn't popular with everyone. The prosecution team had hoped to announce Luna's successful release as part of their closing arguments, creating a narrative arc of destruction and redemption that would resonate with the jury. Environmental activists had planned awareness campaigns around her release, hoping to leverage media attention to highlight broader conservation issues. But Elena remained firm. The best outcome for Luna is to return to the wild with minimal human attention. A media circus at her release site would only add stress and potentially compromise her transition. Preparations moved quickly after that. The chosen release site in Coronado National Forest was scouted thoroughly to ensure it met all requirements for a successful Bobcat reintroduction. Trail cameras were discreetly installed to monitor Luna's adaptation without human interference. A small GPS tracker designed to degrade and fall off after approximately 6 months was attached to a lightweight collar, the minimum monitoring necessary to confirm her successful transition. 3 days before Grayson's trial was scheduled to begin, a small convoy departed the secure facility before dawn. Luna, lightly sedated for the journey, traveled in a specialized transport crate with Elena, keeping constant watch over her condition. The release team consisted of just 6 people: Elena, Sophia, and Ramon from the Rehabilitation Center, Agent Torres representing the FBI, and 2 wildlife biologists from the Forest Service who would help monitor the area after Luna's release. They arrived at the release site as the morning sun crested the mountains, casting golden light across a landscape remarkably similar to Luna's original territory. Rocky outcroppings, scattered juniper and pine, and the dense underbrush that provided cover for both predator and prey. Perfect bobcat habitat, one of the Forest Service biologists confirmed, as they carefully positioned the transport crate facing a natural corridor between 2 rock formations. Plenty of rabbits, squirrels, and ground birds for hunting. Water source about half a mile east. No human settlements within her likely range. Elena performed one final health check as Luna began to stir from the light sedation. The bobcat's vital signs were strong, her eyes clear and alert as consciousness returned. For a moment, those golden eyes locked with Elena's in a gaze that seemed to contain a depth of understanding beyond human comprehension. Wild meeting wild, a connection formed through adversity and healing. "You're going home, Luna," Elena whispered. "Not the home you knew, but a new one, safe and clean." With practiced efficiency, the team positioned themselves at a respectful distance, cameras ready to document the release for scientific purposes only. These images would never be shared with media or the public. Elena unlatched the transport crate door and raised it slowly, then stepped back to join the others. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Luna remained inside the crate, assessing her surroundings with the caution characteristic of her species. Then, with no warning, she bolted, a streak of spotted fur launching from the crate into the brush with explosive speed. She paused once about 30 yards away, turning to look back at the humans who had been part of her journey. Then she was gone, disappearing into her new territory with the silent efficiency of a born predator. "Perfect," Sophia whispered, the single word carrying volumes of professional satisfaction. The team remained at the site long enough to confirm Luna wasn't lingering nearby, then quietly departed, leaving the forest to its newest resident. The GPS tracker showed Luna exploring steadily, moving deeper into the territory with purposeful direction. "She knows exactly what she's doing," Ramon observed as they monitored the signal. "That's not random movement. She's systematically mapping her new territory, identifying resources and security points." The tracker would provide basic location data for months to come, but the most important transition had already occurred. Luna was wild again, free from the medical interventions and human care that had saved her life, but always remained fundamentally unnatural for a creature like her. As they drove back toward Tucson, Elena found herself experiencing the bittersweet mixture of triumph and loss familiar to wildlife rehabilitators, the joy of a successful release tempered by the personal connection that must now be severed. Luna had been an extraordinary case, not just medically, but in the larger impact her story had created. Richard Grayson's trial began on schedule 3 days later, with Luna's medical case presented in excruciating detail. Photographs of her surgery, the collected plastic waste, toxicology reports, and tissue samples all entered into evidence. The prosecution was careful to inform the court that Luna had already been successfully released back into the wild, emphasizing that her return to freedom represented the hoped-for outcome for the entire ecosystem damaged by Desert Chem's actions. The trial lasted just 9 days, shorter than anticipated due to the overwhelming evidence and the testimony of Desert Chem's former CFO. Grayson was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 8 years in federal prison and personally fined $2 million. The corporation itself received the maximum penalties available under environmental law, $150 million in fines and remediation costs, plus an additional $50 million to establish a conservation trust fund for long-term monitoring and habitat protection in the affected areas. It was a landmark case, setting precedents for corporate environmental accountability that legal experts predicted would influence similar prosecutions for years to come. More importantly for Elena and her team, it guaranteed the resources necessary to heal the damaged ecosystem Luna had called home. In the months that followed, Elena returned to her regular duties at the rehabilitation center, which had seen significant positive changes resulting from Luna's case. Donations had funded expanded facilities, additional staff positions, and new equipment that enhanced their capacity to treat wildlife affected by human activities. A dedicated environmental toxicology lab had been established on site, specializing in the detection and treatment of contamination cases. Luna's GPS tracker continued to transmit data, painting a picture of successful adaptation to her new territory. The signal showed her establishing a normal range, approximately 8 square miles centered around a rocky ridge with multiple den sites. Wildlife cameras occasionally captured glimpses of her, always from a distance, always in motion, exactly as a healthy wild bobcat should be. 6 months after Luna's release, Elena joined a small team of scientists conducting a monitoring visit to Red Rock Canyon, Luna's original territory, now in the midst of intensive remediation efforts. The transformation was remarkable. The contaminated soil had been removed, native vegetation replanted, and water filtration systems installed to protect the underground aquifer. Wildlife was beginning to return, cautiously recolonizing areas that had been toxic death zones just months earlier. The preliminary surveys are encouraging, reported the lead environmental scientist as they stood at a viewpoint overlooking the canyon. Small mammal populations are already recovering in the peripheral areas. It will take time, but the ecosystem is showing resilience. Elena thought of Luna, now thriving in her new home 100 miles away, carrying no knowledge of the changes her case had inspired. The bobcat had moved on, as wild creatures do, focusing on the immediate concerns of survival rather than dwelling on past traumas. There was wisdom in that approach that humans would do well to emulate. 1 year to the day after Luna was found collapsed beside the highway, Elena received a notification from the wildlife monitoring system. Luna's GPS collar had finally degraded and fallen off as designed, its last transmission showing her in the heart of her established territory. More significantly, the most recent trail camera images revealed something unexpected. Luna was not alone. 2 small spotted forms accompanied her in the frame, young kittens following their mother as she patrolled her domain. Elena studied the image with a scientist's attention to detail and a rehabilitator's profound satisfaction. Luna had not only survived and recovered, she was now contributing to the next generation, her resilience extending beyond her individual life to the continuation of her species. That evening, as the desert sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, Elena stood outside the rehabilitation center, looking toward the distant mountains. Somewhere out there, Luna moved through the gathering darkness, teaching her kittens to hunt, to hide, to survive in a world both beautiful and perilous. The bobcat would never know the role she had played in changing human behaviors and laws, in bringing accountability to those who would poison the wild for profit. But perhaps that was as it should be. Luna's gift to the human world had been inadvertent, a consequence of her suffering rather than her intention. The true measure of humanity's response would be whether they could learn from that gift, creating systems and laws that prevented such suffering before it occurred. As new patients arrived at the center each day, victims of car strikes, power line collisions, territorial disputes and shrinking habitats, Elena renewed her commitment to that vision. Luna's legacy lived on in strengthened environmental protections, in corporate accountability, and in the awakened public consciousness about the fragility of wild ecosystems. Most importantly, it lived on in the simple fact that a wild bobcat, who had once arrived at death's door, her body filled with human garbage mistaken for pregnancy, now raced through the moonlight with her kittens free and whole once more. The cycle of nature continuing despite everything, resilient beyond measure.